The sound of his old sputtering truck breaking the quiet morning was as familiar to Tom as the weight of his worries. It was a crisp autumn day, and Tom had just dropped his 7-year-old daughter Lily off at school. Her bright smile as she waved goodbye from the playground gave him a sliver of hope, even as his mind swirled with unpaid bills, overdue rent, and the nagging thought that dinner tonight might just be peanut butter on toast again. Life as a single dad wasn't easy, but Tom was determined to give Lily a better future, even if that meant working long hours at the part-time mechanic job that barely paid enough to scrape by. As he drove toward the small auto shop where he worked, he noticed a car pulled over on the side of the road, hood popped up and steam curling into the chilly air. A woman stood next to it, waving her arms in a mix of frustration and helplessness. She was well-dressed, too well-dressed for their quiet little town, with a sleek black coat and leather boots that looked like they cost more than Tom's entire wardrobe. Her face, though, was stressed, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Tom pulled over instinctively, parking his truck a few feet away. He grabbed his toolbox from the back and approached cautiously. "Car trouble?" he asked, keeping his tone friendly but professional. The woman turned toward him, relief washing over her face. "Oh, thank goodness. Yes, it just started making this awful clunking sound and then it stalled. I have no idea what's wrong with it." "I can take a look," Tom offered. He knelt by the car, glancing up at her. "Name's Tom, by the way." "Grace," she replied, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair. "I don't usually drive this far out of the city, but I had some business nearby. I guess my car decided it wasn't for the trip." Tom nodded and got to work, his fingers moving expertly as he examined the engine. It didn't take long for him to diagnose the problem, a loose serpentine belt that had caused the engine to overheat. "You're in luck," he said, standing and wiping his hands on a rag. "It's nothing too serious. I can fix it if you've got a little time." "Really?" Grace looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't want to be a bother. I could call a tow truck." "No need," Tom interrupted. "I work at the shop just down the road. I've got the tools and spare parts there. Shouldn't take more than an hour." Grace hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "If you're sure." "Thank you, I really appreciate it." Tom waved her off. "It's no trouble." He drove her car to the shop, with Grace following behind in his truck. Once there, he got to work right away, removing the damaged belt and replacing it with a new one. Grace stood nearby, watching with a mix of curiosity and admiration. She noticed the grease stains on his hands, the worn patches on his jacket, and the quiet determination in his eyes. When he mentioned he had a daughter, her interest deepened. "You're a single dad?" she asked. "Yeah," Tom replied, not looking up from his work. "It's just me and Lily. She's my world." He smiled faintly, though Grace caught the weariness behind it. "It's tough sometimes, but we get by." Grace didn't press further, sensing his pride. Instead, she said, "She's lucky to have a dad like you." Tom finished the repairs and started the car to ensure everything was running smoothly. "Good as new," he said, stepping back. "All set?" Grace asked, reaching into her purse. Her face fell when she realized it was empty. "Oh no, I don't have any cash on me. Can I write you a check?" Tom shook his head. "Don't worry about it. Just glad I could help." "No, really, I insist," Grace said, her tone firm. "You've gone out of your way for me." Tom smiled, brushing off her concern. "A simple thank you is enough." Grace hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving without compensating him. "I'll send you something," she promised. "Do you have a card or something with your name and address?" Tom scribbled his name and the shop's address on a scrap of paper and handed it to her. "If it makes you feel better, but really, it's no big deal." Grace thanked him again, her gratitude evident in her voice as she drove away. Tom returned to his work, pushing the encounter to the back of his mind. Acts of kindness were just part of who he was, even if life hadn't been particularly kind to him. Little did he know, Grace wasn't just grateful, she was also curious. A week had passed since Tom had fixed Grace's car, and life had returned to its usual rhythm of early mornings, long hours, and late nights poring over bills at the kitchen table. The weather had grown colder, and the leaves on the trees that lined his small neighborhood were now a vibrant patchwork of gold and red. Lily loved the fall, and on the rare days Tom wasn't too tired, they would rake the leaves into piles so she could jump in them, giggling as if the weight of the world didn't exist. Tom envied that about her, her ability to find joy in the simplest things. For him, joy seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford, especially with rent due in just 2 weeks and his savings dwindling faster than he could replenish them. Still, he kept going because Lily deserved a dad who never gave up. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway pulled Tom's attention away from the old radiator he'd been tinkering with in his garage. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, surprised to see Grace stepping out of a modest rental car. She was dressed more casually this time, jeans and a thick sweater, but her confident demeanor was the same. "Grace?" Tom said, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Didn't expect to see you again. Everything okay with the car?" "Running perfectly, thanks to you," Grace replied with a warm smile. She held a covered dish in her hands, and Tom's brow furrowed slightly as he noticed it. "I know you said not to worry about paying you back, but I couldn't just let your kindness go unacknowledged, so I baked you a pie." Tom blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "A pie?" Grace laughed lightly, the sound carrying over the crisp autumn air. "Yes, a pie. It's apple, my grandmother's recipe. I figured it was the least I could do." Tom scratched the back of his neck, feeling a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. "You didn't have to go through the trouble." "It's not trouble," Grace said firmly. "You helped me when I was stranded and didn't ask for anything in return. That kind of kindness deserves to be appreciated." Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Well, thank you. I'm sure Lily will love it. She's got a sweet tooth like you wouldn't believe." "Lily's your daughter, right?" Grace asked carefully, handing him the pie. "You mentioned her last time." "Yeah," Tom said, a soft smile spreading across his face at the thought of his little girl. "She's 7, going on 17, or at least that's how it feels some days." Grace chuckled. "She sounds like quite the character." "She is," Tom agreed. He gestured toward the small porch attached to his house. "You want to sit for a bit? I'd offer you coffee, but I think I'm down to my last few grounds." Grace shook her head. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to drop this off and say thank you again." "But how are you doing?" The question caught him off guard. Most people didn't ask. They assumed he was fine, or maybe they didn't want to know the answer. Tom hesitated, unsure of how much to share. "I'm managing," he finally said. "Things aren't easy, but they never really have been. I just try to take it one day at a time." Grace studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "That's a lot for one person to carry." Tom shrugged, his hands gripping the edges of the pie dish. "It is what it is. Lily's worth it though. She's my reason for everything." Grace nodded, understanding in her eyes. "She's lucky to have you." Tom smiled faintly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough for her. I want her to have more than this, you know. More than a dad who's always worrying about money." "You're doing more than you think," Grace said gently. "You're giving her love, stability, and a father who works hard for her. That's worth more than anything money can buy." Tom didn't reply right away, but her words stayed with him, warming a part of him he hadn't realized had grown cold. "Thanks," he said quietly. "That means a lot." Grace smiled and glanced at her watch. "I should get going, but it was really nice seeing you again." "You too," Tom said, walking her back to her car. "And thanks for the pie. Lily and I will enjoy it." As Grace drove away, Tom stood in the driveway for a moment, watching until her car disappeared down the road. He felt a strange sense of comfort, like her visit had momentarily lightened the weight on his shoulders. When Lily came home later that day, her eyes lit up at the sight of the pie. "Who made this, Daddy?" she asked, already reaching for a slice. "A nice lady named Grace," Tom replied, cutting a piece for her. "She wanted to say thank you for something I helped her with." Lily took a bite and grinned. "She makes good pie." Tom chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Yeah, she does." That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Tom found himself thinking about Grace again. She seemed out of place in their small town, like she belonged somewhere bigger, grander. But there was something about her that felt grounded too, something that made her kindness seem genuine. He didn't expect to see her again, but he hoped she was doing well, wherever her life might take her. Little did he know, Grace wasn't done with her act of gratitude, not by a long shot. 2 weeks had passed since Tom had first met Grace on that chilly autumn morning. Life for Tom continued its familiar patterns: early mornings, long hours at the shop, and evenings spent juggling bills and trying to stretch his paycheck a little further. The pie Grace had brought over was long gone, but Lily still talked about it, asking if the nice pie lady might visit again. Tom would chuckle and say maybe, though in his heart, he doubted it. People like Grace didn't usually linger in places like this, and he figured her visit had been a polite one-time gesture of gratitude. It was late in the afternoon when Grace pulled up to the auto shop again. This time, Tom saw her coming through the dusty garage window. Her car was the same sleek black sedan he had repaired a couple of weeks earlier, and it gleamed against the backdrop of the shop's weathered exterior. Tom wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside, surprised to see her again. "Grace," he said, smiling despite his confusion. "Didn't expect to see you back here. Everything okay with the car?" Grace stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She was dressed sharply again, in a tailored coat and scarf, but her expression was warm and approachable. "The car's been running great," she said. "But I was in the area again and thought I'd stop by. I hope I'm not interrupting." Tom shook his head. "Not at all. Just finishing up a job. What brings you out this way?" Grace hesitated, glancing around the modest garage. "Well, I was hoping to pick your brain about something. Car-related, of course," she added quickly, though there was a faint twinkle in her eye that suggested otherwise. Tom raised an eyebrow but gestured toward the small office attached to the garage. "Come on in. It's warmer inside." The office was humble, to say the least: a small desk piled with invoices, a couple of mismatched chairs, and a coffee maker that looked older than Tom. Grace didn't seem to mind. She took a seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "So, what's on your mind?" Tom asked, leaning against the desk. Grace smiled, her tone casual but probing. "I was curious about how someone like you, someone so talented and hardworking, ended up in a place like this." Tom blinked, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean, a place like this?" "I don't mean it as an insult," Grace clarified quickly. "I just mean, you clearly know your way around cars. You're skilled and resourceful. Have you ever thought about doing something bigger? Maybe running your own shop?" Tom chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "Bigger takes money, Grace. And money's something I don't have. Running my own shop would be a dream, sure. But right now, I'm just trying to keep the lights on at home." Grace tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Is it just you and Lily? No other family to help out?" Tom nodded. "It's just us. Her mom, well, she left a long time ago. It's been me and Lily against the world ever since." Grace's gaze softened. "That must be hard." "It is," Tom admitted, his voice quiet. "But she's worth it. Every late night, every sacrifice, it's all for her." Grace was silent for a moment, as if weighing her next words carefully. "You know," she said finally, "I wasn't always in a position to bake pies and drive nice cars." Tom looked at her, surprised by the admission. Really? Grace nodded. I grew up in a small town, not unlike this one. My parents worked hard, but money was always tight. I know what it's like to worry about bills, to feel like you're just barely keeping your head above water. That's why I try to help people when I can. People who remind me of where I came from. Tom didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected Grace to open up like this, to reveal a side of herself that felt so relatable. That's kind of you, he said at last. Grace smiled faintly. It's not kindness, really. It's gratitude. I've been where you are, Tom, and I know how hard it is. But I also know how much a little help can mean. She stood then, smoothing her coat. I should get going, she said, her tone lightening. But before I do, can I leave something for you? Tom frowned, puzzled. What do you mean? Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a plain white envelope. Just something to say thank you again for fixing my car, for being so generous with your time. I know you said you didn't want payment, but I insist. Tom hesitated, his pride warring with his practicality. Grace, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, she interrupted gently. But I want to. She placed the envelope on the desk and gave him a reassuring smile. Don't open it until I'm gone. It'll make me feel less awkward. Tom chuckled despite himself. All right, if that's what you want. Grace nodded, then extended her hand. Thank you again, Tom, for everything. Tom shook her hand, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. You're welcome. And, thank you for the pie. And whatever this is. Grace laughed softly. You'll see. With that, she walked out, her heels clicking against the pavement once more. Tom watched her drive away, the envelope still sitting on the desk behind him. For a moment, he considered leaving it unopened, his pride still lingering, but curiosity got the better of him. He tore it open carefully and stared at the contents in disbelief. Inside was a check for $10,000, along with a handwritten note. Tom, your kindness and hard work deserve more than just a thank you. I own a small chain of auto repair shops and would love for you to come work for me. The check is to help you get back on your feet and hopefully take a step towards something bigger. If you're interested, give me a call. My number's below. Grace. Tom sank into the chair, the check trembling in his hands. For a long moment, he just sat there, overwhelmed by the weight of her generosity. He thought of Lily, of the future he wanted to give her, and for the first time in years, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a real chance. Tom stared at the check for a long time, his emotions swirling between disbelief, gratitude, and a deeply ingrained reluctance to accept help. The number stared back at him, bold and unwavering, as if it were daring him to believe that someone like him, someone who had spent years scraping by, could possibly deserve such generosity. His first instinct was to call Grace and tell her he couldn't accept it, but as he sat there, the sound of Lily's laughter drifting faintly from the backyard where she played, he thought about what this money could mean. A chance to catch up on rent, to pay off the stack of bills on his kitchen counter, to buy Lily the new winter coat she needed without worrying about whether he'd have enough left over for groceries. And then there was the job opportunity. The note Grace had included felt just as overwhelming as the check. She owned a chain of auto repair shops. She wanted him to work for her. It felt like a dream too big to be real, but as he turned the note over in his hands, Tom decided he owed her more than just gratitude. He owed her an answer, even if it took every ounce of courage he had to call the number she'd written. The next morning, after dropping Lily off at school, Tom sat in his truck in the parking lot, gripping his phone tightly. He had dialed Grace's number twice already but hung up before it could ring. His pride was a stubborn thing, whispering that he shouldn't need anyone's help, that accepting this would make him weak. But then he thought of Lily again, her bright eyes, her endless belief in him, and it gave him the push he needed. He dialed the number one more time and let it ring. Hello? Grace's voice came through calm and warm, as if she had been expecting his call. Grace, it's Tom, he said, his voice steady despite the nerves tightening his chest. I got your envelope. There was a pause, and then Grace said, I was hoping you would call. Did you read the note? I did, Tom replied. And I don't even know where to begin. The check, the job offer, it's too much. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Tom, Grace said gently. You helped me when you didn't have to. You reminded me of the kind of person I want to be. This isn't charity, it's an opportunity. And I think you've more than earned it. Tom hesitated, his grip tightening on the phone. I don't know if I can accept the money, Grace. I don't know, it feels like too much. Then don't think of it as just money, Grace said. Think of it as a head start, a way to give yourself and Lily the life you've been working so hard to build. And the job, that's because I need people like you. People who are skilled, hardworking, and good. My shops could use someone like you. Tom, this is a chance for both of us. Her words settled over him, easing the tension in his chest. You really think I can do it? Work for you, I mean. I know you can, Grace said without hesitation. You've already proven that. Tom exhaled, the weight of his doubts lifting just a little. All right, he said finally. I'll take the job, and the check, well, I'll use it wisely. But I want you to know I'll pay you back someday. Grace laughed. Softly. Consider it an investment, not a loan. But if it makes you feel better, you can pay it forward when the time comes. Tom smiled, the knot of pride and resistance in his chest loosening. Deal. Over the next few weeks, Tom's life began to shift in ways he hadn't dared to imagine. Grace arranged for him to visit one of her shops in a nearby town, where he met her staff and got a feel for the business. The shop was larger and busier than the one he'd been working at, but Tom quickly found his footing. His skills as a mechanic shone, and his natural ability to connect with people made him a favorite among the customers. The new job came with a steady salary, benefits, and the kind of stability Tom had longed for. With the money from Grace's check, he paid off his overdue rent and caught up on his bills. He finally replaced the worn-out tires on his truck, bought Lily the new coat she needed, and even managed to set a little aside for emergencies. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. Grace stayed in touch, checking in on Tom occasionally and offering encouragement when he needed it. Their conversations became more frequent, and though they were often brief, they carried a warmth that spoke of a bond forged through mutual respect and kindness. Grace shared more about her own journey, how she had worked her way up from humble beginnings to build her business, how she never forgot the people who had helped her along the way. One crisp December evening, Tom sat at the kitchen table, watching Lily color in a holiday-themed activity book. The house felt warmer, cozier than it had in years. The lights on the small Christmas tree they had decorated together twinkled softly, and the scent of hot cocoa filled the air. Tom thought about everything that had happened, the chance encounter with Grace, her generosity, the new job that had given him hope, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Daddy, Lily said, looking up from her coloring. Do you think the nice pie lady will come visit us again? Tom smiled. Maybe, he said. Maybe we should invite her over sometime. What do you think? Lily's eyes lit up. Yes. And we can make her a pie this time. Tom chuckled, nodding. I think she'd like that. As he sat there, watching his daughter's joy, Tom realized something. Grace hadn't just given him money or a job, she had given him the ability to dream again, to believe that life could be more than just surviving. And in doing so, she had reminded him of the power of kindness, how one act could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. He made a silent promise to himself. When the time came, he would pay it forward, just like Grace had said. Because sometimes, all it took was one person believing in you to change everything.